Now, I want to ask you something. I'm just going to jump right into this because as a child that loved Die Hard and before the IMDb's of the world, I wanted to find out about my favorite characters who I'd seen 100 times. So when I meet them, they would see just how weird I was. Now, one thing I found out was that your career as a performer began with you dancing, something you credit your mother for taking you to the ballet as a child. How long were you a dancer before the transition into acting actually started?
Well, I was a pro for 5 years. And it was a kind of a smooth transition because what happened was I was working in a dance company, and we did some work with a choreographer who did what we call total theater. That means you use your body, but you use everything else as well. And it was quite physically demanding. But for me, the breakthrough was that I could use my whole being rather than, just my body and being silent on a stage. It just didn't. It's a very artificial thing in a way, and it seemed, a step toward some more natural way of expressing myself, and I loved that. And soon after that, an opportunity came along where I could do a student film, and then that was my first on-screen experience as an actor. In the course of that, I learned that I lack some skills, and I had to then do something about those. But while all this happened, I was still dancing, but not for much longer. That kind of sealed it for me.
I know, like, you transitioned from dance into acting. When you got into dancing, was that ever something that you went into planning to make like a long go of, and then acting came and took its place, or how did that transition happen?
I'm looking at this with the benefit of a long distance perspective. I'm really not a natural dancer, and I'm also naturally a bit on the lazy side. So for me to become a dancer was always a bit of a stretch. I did it because I saw it as a way of getting some attention, I guess, and being able to produce myself, and seeing those people out there in front in the limelight, and that attracted me, and I just couldn't see any other way of getting there.
Yeah, so it was more of it was more of like just a desire to perform in general. It seems like, or to have an audience.
Yes, very much so. I mean, these days I think, boy, I wish I'd been a musician.
What's I guess because they get a lot more attention, always front and center on the stage. Is that what that's about?
Well, there are several aspects to it, but I love music, and I started playing the cello when I was about 50. And I'm terrible at it, but one of the things that attracts me to it is that I will never get to the bottom of it. There will always be more to be discovered and so forth, and that's just great about music. Now, I'm not saying that the other arts don't have that depth, but there are other limiting factors. I mean, dancing is over when you're 40, so that's quite a restriction. And with acting, it's the parts that you can play contract. So, pretty soon at 60 or 70, there's only a few.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing The Irishman. And they're using those de-aging techniques with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. Now, one thing I want to segue on, you spoke of just diving into something. One of the things that you dove into was your first acting work took place on stage, and you didn't really have any formal education into it. And as you spoke to, it was more so of a performance art of just using your body and now being able to use your voice. How was theater community where you were at the time as far as their perception of actors without traditional training? How did they treat you? And more in depth to that is, there were professionally trained actors there. Was it any type of contrast, or were they more so helpful in what you had to bring to the table?
Well, interesting. the these productions, there were a couple or three, actually required a great degree of physical ability and stamina. It was very, very hard work. And so this man I did this with habitually used dancers because someone who wasn't extremely fit wouldn't have been able to make it. It was that sort of thing. So I was in the same position as everybody else. They were all dancers that had to extend themselves rather than being well schooled for the task of acting. So I wasn't sticking out in any way at that point, but I did notice that I had to do a lot of shouting and stuff, and I didn't have any technique. I didn't know what to do with my voice, and I lost it pretty quickly and got hoarse. And I decided, I have to acquire some techniques. On the whole, depending on where you are and what you do, there are always a few people that enter the field, in a non-traditional way, and it obviously matters much more on stage than it does on screen. But I've never encountered animosity for that.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like the perfect transition to be a part of a production like that, where you're surrounded by. You're doing theater, but you're surrounded by other dancers. That's like perfect. You mentioned in another interview, and as of and actually in the last answer, about your voice being the greatest challenge as far as acting went. And I can only imagine how it would go hoarse, like doing the performances every night, and if you're having to scream, I don't even know what the correct way is not to, but if you're not doing it that way, I could see how that would be an issue if you don't have your voice by the end of the week. Other than that, though, you felt confident in your abilities. I watched the interview that you did with, I'm spacing on his name right now, but it was... I
think he was a teenager, 13, 14, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
It was
the British guy. Yeah.
It was a great interview. And I was really impressed. My wife's watching it. It's like, why does that kid sound like he's 35 years old? He's really good.
Yeah, he was right, wasn't he? Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
But as far as like the having that confidence in yourself, can you expand on that a little bit as far as what you meant, and with your voice, like when you took training for that, like what course of action did that involve to get your voice to a place where you could scream every night?
Let me answer that bit first. I simply found an actress, an acquaintance of someone else, and asked her to work with me. And it's actually quite a simple thing. We just have to practice a little bit. What we tend to do, we tend to put some tension into the throat and squeeze, and that makes the vocal cords sore after a little while. And all you have to do is to learn to breathe from your deep belly, and just let the air stream past it in an unobstructed way, and then that's it.
Use that diaphragm.
Exactly, diaphragmatic breathing, and you need a sort of certain placement to allow for that to happen. That wasn't difficult for me, because one of the things that you do acquire when you study ballet is that you are you train your kinesthetic sense, so you are very aware of what it is you're doing, and that's come in handy quite a few times. When I was doing some stunts and fights and things like that. There was more to the first part of the question, wasn't there? I've forgotten it now. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I kind of looped around quite a bit on that one, trying to find my way back.
One thing I was interested in asking him was, like you say, you came in primarily being a dancer, and then now you went into the acting. But let's say fast forward a few years. Let me ask you this: has anything changed in your approach to acting now? Because you mentioned you learned with the voice technique, and I'm pretty sure you picked up other techniques along the way. Has anything else changed as far as your acting approach throughout the years? Have you become more seasoned?
I would hope so. Why I decided I didn't need to go to acting school. There were two aspects. First of all, I was arrogant and thought I.
And you mentioned being lazy.
Yeah. And there are several aspects to being on stage, and one of is, of course, that you cannot allow your inhibitions to show. But excuse me, but that is something I was already familiar with, right? I've been on stage for 3 or 4 years, and in fact, I started performing when I was about 9. Kiddie ballet and that sort of stuff. So stage was not frightening to me. It was, that's why I got my attention. That's why I like to be, and so it's a kind of a freeing experience, if you can see it that way. And then, of course, when you do more demanding acting work, you kind of need to know what effect it has, what you're doing. So there's quite a difference as to whether you're performing for 2,000 people in a theater or whether you're in a huge close-up. If you use the right measure of the former for the latter, it just becomes ridiculous. But some of that you just have to, if you're not totally insensitive, some of that you'll just acquire, because you notice pretty quickly what works and what doesn't. You get feedback all the time, kind and not so kind.
I could imagine, yeah.